Hello, this is Fast Forward, where we're looking at the numerous trends that have been accelerated by the global pandemic and sharing expert perspectives that have been designed to help UK businesses plan for the future. I've been speaking with Robin Bew, the Managing Director of the Economist Intelligence Unit. That's the forecasting and research arm of the Economist Group. I can't think of a better person to give a helicopter view of our economic future. I kicked things off by asking him what the UK's immediate prospects were and what was likely to happen next.
And I think, in a month's time, we'll be listening to the news and you're going to start to see some really positive economic data and some positive indicators. Some of the data actually that Google produced about footfall and transport usage, and so that's all going to start moving up quite quickly. I think the more difficult thing is, of course, that even though those numbers will be very positive, they're not going to get us back to where we were before all this started. And so we've been doing some work about how quickly we're going to really get back to that. So we think that in the UK, Europe and America, we're not going to be back to where we were before this started. So let's say what the economy looked like in January of this year. We're not going to get back there until sometime in 2022. So it could be at the beginning for some countries, towards the end for other countries. But when the level of economic activity that we saw pretty immediately before the lockdowns began, we are still several years away from that. So what that really means is that 2, maybe 3 lost years of economic activity. So that's a very difficult message.
What will recovery look like in different industries?
I mean, the first thing is to recognise how much of the problem in each sector is just a result of some very temporary restrictions on activity. So, for example, hairdressers, they were shut. And they will at some point be open, and you're going to see those businesses start to return to something that looks a lot more normal. So it's been awful, but it will get better. And that's going to be true for a whole bunch of industries and sectors where the immediate restriction on their ability to operate will be eased. And so you will see something of a rebound. So it's been grim and it will get less grim. But then I think we have to recognise that for some sectors, something fundamental has changed. And that change is likely to persist. And so I guess the obvious place is in retail. But I think the reality is this pandemic has accelerated a trend that we all knew was there already, which is that the bricks and mortar retail was under a lot of pressure. We saw more and more retail moving online. People are sort of nervous. Over the last 3 months, they've learned how to do a lot of things online that perhaps they weren't doing before. It seems pretty unlikely that sector's ever going to go back to where it was before. And the trends that people have been talking about for a long time around that hollowing out of the high street and more businesses moving online, I mean, that trend has just dramatically accelerated. There is no reason to think that you're going to see a sort of that trend reverse. So that sector, we just accelerated the problem there. And hospitality things. So there are various aspects of hospitality which are going to be affected for a very long time. I think any kind of business where the raison d'etre is social is going to find it much more difficult in a structural way. So even though the lockdown is easing and some of the restrictions about how social distancing works is changing, it's pretty clear that there are big aspects of the leisure and hospitality industry which just are going to be different because people's appetite to sort of spend time in close proximity with others, that's going to be different.
Which industries are going to come out of the pandemic well?
We have all demonstrated that to some extent we can work effectively remotely, or a lot of different sectors have demonstrated that. That's going to mean that the industries which supply the equipment, do the training, all the things that are necessary for business to operate effectively in a remote situation, those businesses structurally are going to do better in the medium term, not just in the recovery. And that's going to be true for bits of the healthcare sector as well. I mean, it's pretty clear. We saw a trend. We have an interest in healthcare in the Economist Group anyway. And we'd seen a trend that diagnosis was becoming more important than treatment over quite a long time. And of course, what this crisis has done is put a lot of pressure on track and trace, testing. We talk about those things all the time. We think those parts of the healthcare industry are going to structurally see an improvement over the medium term. So I think easy to recognise that as the lockdown eases, all sectors will bounce back to some extent. I think the really interesting thing is to think about, okay, what's changed for the long term? And what does that mean about the relative health of all these different industries? And for some sectors, the long-term trend is more negative, but for some it will be more positive.
How well are businesses adapting for the future?
This is a space where business businesses are varying quite dramatically, and I think it probably needs in general to be more thought. So, we talk to a lot of companies who are being decisive, acting pretty quickly, recognizing that things are going to be different for the long haul, and trying to figure that out. But we do also see a lot of firms who are effectively biding their time, so kind of hoping that we're going to get back to where we were before all this started. They're doing temporary things, so husbanding their cash, all that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, they haven't really started thinking about what the long-term answer might be. And I guess my observation is that now's the time. In fact, the time probably was 6 weeks ago or so. But now is the moment when you really need to figure out how your business is going to work over the medium term. If the reality is that the fundamental drivers of your business and the value equation, those things are going to be different in the medium time, and you're going to have to make some changes.
Where are you seeing most innovation?
Small owner-managed companies are more nimble, and you can kind of see that coming through. I mean, I would imagine for a lot of people listening to this, they'll have gone out and they'll have seen that some of their local restaurants have sort of reimagined themselves as sort of grocers, and you've seen pubs setting themselves up as shops. And a lot of the ones that have done that are the ones which are very small chains, quite entrepreneurial leadership, quite comfortable to make changes, perhaps a bit more risk-taking. And you see some bigger organisations, perhaps where they're much more corporate, and you're not seeing that. So you might see in your local area that the big chain restaurants, they're still shuttered, but the local sort of more entrepreneurial ones are all doing other stuff. And I do think that bigger firms find this harder, but it's going to be necessary, because for a lot of industries, we're not going to get back to where we were before. And I'm not seeing enough companies being creative enough quickly enough.
How will the UK's recovery compare with the rest of the world?
The things that you needed to do well in the crisis are a little bit different from the things you're going to need to do well in the recovery. And the one thing that the UK has got is it's got a lot of government spending firepower. So the UK government does have a lot of capacity to borrow and spend in a way that some other countries do not. So if you look, say, in continental Europe, we take an extreme example, like a country like Italy, it's going to be really difficult for their government to really open up the taps and deploy government money to get things moving, because they're already in debt up to the hilt. UK doesn't look like that, so the UK has options. We also control our own interest rates, so clearly in Europe they have a combined interest rate across the whole of the Eurozone, so we've got options there. And then there are some other things that work. Which sectors have you got which are strong? So I said we've got sectors where productivity is low, but the sectors that are strong in the UK, the service sector, the financial industry sector, they're very well connected globally. They're very well equipped to work remotely. So the sectors which are important to Britain are also happen to be sectors where you can operate remotely. So if, for example, if physical manufacturing was really important, that might be much more difficult. But for us, it's not quite like that. So I think, no, the UK will recover a bit better than people think, because the government will be more helpful. Germany's also got a lot of fiscal firepower. They can spend money. If you look at places that are going to struggle a bit more, Spain and Italy, they just don't have the government financial resources to do the things that need to be done. The US has got firepower, so they will spend to try to pull the economy forward.
How will global power shift as we emerge from the pandemic?
China is absolutely the one to watch. They're going to position themselves, they are already positioning themselves as having navigated this more successfully than the West. So if you look at their death rate, given the size of the country overall, it appears to be very low. And while there may be some dodgy reporting, I think the reality is it is lower than we've seen in other smaller countries. Government's clearly demonstrated that it's prepared to do some really very difficult things that would be hard to do in a democracy. The degree of the lockdown was tremendous. That's enabling them to say to the rest of the world, our model can work. And what we're seeing is there's a lot of other countries around the world which are looking at China, and they're thinking that there was already this tremendous tension between the West and China, or really between the US and China, and that you could see to some extent that the world was starting to almost bifurcate between which camp were you going to be in. One result of this crisis is that China now has a narrative to the rest of the world that says, well, maybe you want to be in our camp because we can deal with stuff like this when the West cannot. And so I suspect, in 5 years' time, we're going to look back on this and you're going to see a world which is rather more divided, maybe not a Cold War in the way that we had with the Soviet Union, but perhaps a bit more commercially divided, a bit more of a sense that you're in one camp and the other. Quite a lot of companies, perhaps, and Google is actually one of them, which can't really operate in both at the same time. You're either in the US and European camp or you're in China, and I think more industries will end up in that space as well. And we're going to end up saying, well, actually, this was the moment when China's sort of leadership of the other camp became really cemented, because they are able to say to a lot of countries which are wobbling, you know, our model works. And while, you know, I imagine a lot of people listening to this are going to be sitting in UK or Europe or America, that might seem surprising. But if you're sitting in Africa right now, or in Latin America, or in the rest of Asia, it doesn't feel like it does to us, and you're going to be looking at China and thinking, well, there's something there to admire. And so I think that the end game here is that China will be in the ascendancy.
Well, there you have it. I really love Robin's international perspective. And if there's one big takeaway for me, it's that it's never too late to start thinking long term about how your business is going to work in the post-pandemic environment. We want to help. If you're a small business, search for Open for Business to find all of our resources in one place. And if you're a large business, work with the team here at Google to scenario plan for what's coming next. Thanks very much.